Have you ever tried to read the Bible, maybe starting right at the beginning and just gotten stuck? Yeah, you're definitely not alone. It's this huge, ancient book. But what if I told you the secret to understanding it isn't about trying harder, but about seeing it differently?
You see, the single biggest mistake most of us make is treating the Bible like a single novel, meant to be read from page 1 all the way to the end. But what if it's not one book at all? What if it's actually a library? An entire collection of different kinds of documents from different authors written over centuries, all bound together. Thinking of it that way, well, it changes everything.
And here's why that shift is so powerful. When you try to read it as one single book, it can feel confusing, even contradictory. You miss the context. But when you see it as a library filled with all of these different genres, history, poetry, letters, law, suddenly the meaning starts to unlock. The context becomes clear, and you can hear all these unique voices, each with their own purpose. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going on a guided tour of this ancient library. We'll start with the epic story of the nation of Israel, then wander into the aisles of poetry and wisdom. We'll meet the prophets, and then jump over to the New Testament to see the Gospels and letters. And by the end, hopefully, we'll have a whole new way of looking at this collection. Okay, so our first stop on the tour takes us right to the foundation of the whole library. This is the law and history section, and these books aren't just a jumble of old stories. They're telling one single epic saga, the story of a nation and its unique relationship with God. So we're talking about the first big chunk of the Old Testament, from Genesis all the way through the book of Esther. These 17 books weave together the origin story of the people of Israel, and at the very heart of this story is this idea of a covenant. Think of it as a formal binding agreement between God and this nation. And this story plays out across these huge sweeps of history. It starts with these intimate family stories of the patriarchs, Abraham, Jacob, Joseph. Then, bam, the defining moment, the Exodus from Egypt, where they're freed from slavery and given their national laws. This leads to the golden age of kings, the monarchy, which then sadly crumbles into the national tragedy of invasion and exile. Now here is the absolute key to this whole section. These books are not trying to be modern, objective history textbooks. They're what scholars call Deuteronomistic history. What does that mean? It means every event is being interpreted through a specific theological lens. The authors want you to see a pattern. When the people are loyal to their covenant with God, things go well. When they're disobedient, disaster. It's history with a powerful message.
All right, now we're moving from the big, sweeping historical story into a totally different part of the library. If that first section was the story of the nation's life, this next collection, the poetry, wisdom, and worship books, this is its soul. It's the nation's heartbeat. This is where we hear their response to everything that happened.
And you can feel the shift immediately. The style changes completely. We're not in historical narrative anymore. We're in poetry, proverbs, and deep philosophical debates. These books aren't telling you what happened. They're showing you how the people of Israel processed it all. It's their raw, human response to God and to the wild journey of life. The Book of Psalms is the perfect example. Just think of it as ancient Israel's prayer book and songbook, all rolled into one. And it is brutally honest. I mean, you find everything in here. Poems of pure joy, gut-wrenching cries of despair, even songs of anger and frustration aimed right at God. It's a masterclass in how to be real with God. And then you get to a book like Proverbs. This quote just nails a really important reading tip. Proverbs are these short, wise sayings about how life generally works. They're like a penny saved is a penny earned. They're nuggets of wisdom, not ironclad promises from God. If you read them like legal contracts, you're going to totally miss the point. But this section isn't all just neat sayings and happy songs. The library also holds books like Job and Ecclesiastes. And these books dive headfirst into the toughest, messiest questions of all. Why do good people suffer? Is there any meaning to all this? They push back against easy answers and remind us that a deep faith can absolutely coexist with deep, unresolved questions. Okay, now we turn a corner into a part of the library that, let's be honest, can feel pretty intimidating: the prophets. But the key to unlocking these powerful, passionate books is to first understand what a prophet actually was and what they weren't. When we hear the word prophet, we usually think of some mystic predicting the future, but that wasn't their main gig at all. A biblical prophet was a covenant enforcement mediator. A what? Okay, think of them like spiritual lawyers or social commentators. Their job was to hold up the covenant, that agreement we talked about, and then look at what was actually happening in society and say, hey, this isn't right. They were calling people back to their commitments to God and to each other. They weren't just foretelling the future, they were forthtelling the truth about the present. All right, so after our tour through the foundational story, the poetry, and the prophets of the Old Testament, we're crossing a threshold. We're now entering the new wing of the library, the New Testament. It's smaller, but just as diverse, and you'll see pretty quickly that this isn't a totally new story, but a direct continuation, and in many ways the climax of the story we've been tracing all along. So the New Testament picks up the storyline hundreds of years later, and the focus zooms way in, centering on one person, Jesus of Nazareth, and the incredible movement that exploded out of his life and teachings, which, of course, became the Christian church. Right at the entrance to this new wing, you immediately run into 4 books that are unlike anything else. Just 4. So why 4?
Because we get 4 different portraits of Jesus. This is the library concept in action, right here. It's so important to remember. These are not books written by Jesus. They're books written about Jesus. Each author, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is telling the same core story, but they're each shaping it and highlighting different things to connect with their own specific audience. 4 perspectives on one incredible story.
And after those 4 Gospels, the library shifts again. Most of the rest of the New Testament is made up of another genre, epistles, which is just a fancy word for letters. And these aren't some kind of abstract theology essays. No, they're real letters, written by leaders like the Apostle Paul to real people in actual churches who are dealing with real-world problems. To really get them, you have to kind of put on your detective hat and try to read their mail, you know? So we've walked through the different sections, from history to poetry, from prophecy to Gospels and letters. How do we put this all together? Well, this is where everything we've learned comes into focus, and it lets us approach the entire library with fresh eyes. Look, here's the bottom line. You wouldn't read a book of poetry the same way you read a legal document, right? And you wouldn't read a personal letter the same way you read a history book. The exact same principle applies to the Bible. The single most important skill you can learn is to figure out what kind of literature you're reading and then adjust how you read it. So here's a super simple, practical guide you can use anytime you open up the Bible. Just 3 steps. First, ask about the context. Who wrote this? Who were they writing to? When? Why? Second, figure out the genre. Is this history? Is it a poem, a law, a letter? And third, based on that, ask yourself, what was the main message the author wanted their original audience to get? Start there, and you're on solid ground. Seeing the Bible as a library doesn't make it any less sacred. If anything, it makes it more accessible, more fascinating. It's an invitation to wander, to explore, to pull different books off the shelf and discover the incredible stories and wisdom inside. So now that you've got the map to the library, what section are you going to check out first?